They had billions in the bank, the best planners money could buy, and weddings most people could only dream of. But there's one thing all that wealth couldn't buy: a way out. From a luxury wedding in China, where 2,000 drones turned into a rain of fire, to an expensive honeymoon flight that turned a newlywed bride into a widow before the first day of their marriage was even over. I'm Nathan Cole. Welcome back to Fatal Files. It was October 21st, 2019, beside Westlake in Hangzhou, China. A glass reception pavilion stretched across the shoreline beneath floating lanterns and mirrored lighting rigs, while guests arrived by electric boats and private helicopters. Above the water, hundreds of illuminated drones hovered in formation as camera crews prepared for the evening performance. The wedding belonged to Lin Mi, 28, and Julian Moreau, 30 years old. The couple was heirs from completely different billionaire families. Lin Mi's father owned one of China's largest tech manufacturing companies, while Julian came from a French luxury hotel and champagne family with properties across Europe and the Middle East. You could say it was a billionaire-coded event with respectable guests arriving by helicopter to a glass pavilion draped in floating flowers and projection screens. But the real spectacle that evening was the massive drone show over the lake. More than 2,000 drones had been programmed to create moving patterns over the lake. Some carried lighting systems, while a smaller section of the formation carried controlled pyrotechnic charges designed to ignite during specific moments of the performance. The launch was scheduled for 10:15 p.m., though weather conditions had already started changing before the show began. It was said in the report that one engineer specifically warned that gusts could push the drones off course during the pyrotechnics. And I actually tried looking into who that engineer was, but there's almost nothing publicly available about them, which says a lot about the kind of clients involved here. So despite the warning, the show continued because delaying it would have disrupted the program and embarrassed the organizers in front of some extremely powerful guests. Apparently, they decided the risk was worth it. Around 10:18 p.m., guests stood near the pavilion filming the drone show as formations moved above the water. Music echoed through the venue, while fireworks exploded between sections of the display. At first, everything looked normal. Then, the wind shifted again. Investigators later found that several drones near the southern side drifted out of alignment during an active pyrotechnic release. One drone, carrying a partially ignited charge, became unstable while correcting against the wind and clipped another nearby drone. And worst, it clipped another drone in the formation while its firework payload was still live, causing several surrounding drones to lose synchronization almost instantly. Damaged drones began falling from the sky while burning debris scattered across the pavilion roof. Guests initially thought it was part of the show. Some drones crashed into the lake, but others struck the pavilion and shattered glass near the crowd. Burning debris ignited decorative fabric along the ceiling, and panic spread as hundreds of guests rushed toward the exits. The pavilion's narrow exit corridors quickly became bottlenecks once smoke filled the structure. Guests slipped on broken glass and water, while alarms mixed with screaming and fireworks exploding outside. Mi and Julian were last seen near the eastern side of the pavilion, helping guests move away from falling debris. Witnesses said Julian guided people through the smoke toward an exit, while Mi stayed behind to help an older relative who had fallen beside overturned tables. That decision separated them during the worst part of the fire. Emergency crews arrived within 11 minutes, but much of the pavilion was already filled with thick smoke and extreme heat. Mi was later found unconscious beneath collapsed canopy material near the eastern corridor. The medical examiner concluded she died from smoke inhalation and severe burns after becoming trapped inside. Julian survived with burns to his arms and smoke inhalation after escaping through a damaged service exit with other guests. Investigators later focused on the drone safety systems and the decision to continue the show despite worsening wind conditions. Despite the scale of the disaster, little information was ever made public. Both families reportedly tried to keep details private, and media coverage remained limited. But as devastating as that sky-high disaster was, there's something even more unsettling about a tragedy that begins right beneath your feet. It was August 16, 2015, at Castello di Vallombra outside Siena, Italy. Warm lights filled the restored stone ballroom, while violin music echoed beneath crystal chandeliers and painted ceilings. Guests moved between candlelit tables lined with white orchids as servers carried champagne across polished marble floors inside the newly renovated castle. Rana Suleiman, 35, and Karim Nasser, 40, spent nearly a year transforming an abandoned Tuscan castle into the centerpiece of their wedding. Karim came from a billionaire family connected to international finance and luxury development, and the restoration became part of the couple's image online. The entire event was designed to feel like guests had stepped into a private royal estate hidden in the Italian countryside. The reception took place inside the castle's main banquet hall, a restored medieval chamber with marble floors, gold lighting, and long stone corridors leading into different wings of the property. Nearly 100 guests attended, including diplomats and investors. By around 10:45 p.m., the celebration had shifted into dancing and speeches as servers moved through narrow hallways carrying drinks toward the ballroom. One waiter noticed a burning smell near the entrance, while another briefly saw smoke coming from a ventilation grate. Most guests assumed it was from candles or kitchen equipment, and nobody panicked at first. By 11:12 p.m., smoke started becoming harder to ignore. Guests near the western corridor noticed haze collecting near the ceiling, while chandeliers flickered slightly above the dance floor. Some people thought it was part of the lighting effects from the DJ equipment. Others started moving toward exits, only to realize the castle's layout was far more confusing than they remembered. The restored sections connected to older medieval corridors that twisted through multiple wings of the property. Several hallways narrowed unexpectedly before splitting into staircases, storage rooms, and dead ends. Some emergency exit signs had even been temporarily removed during final decoration work earlier that week because planners thought they ruined the historic aesthetic of the castle interior. Then, at around 11:18 p.m., the power inside part of the ballroom suddenly failed, and the music stopped mid-song. While organizers were figuring out what the problem was, thick black smoke poured from gaps near the ceiling beams and spread across the upper half of the chamber. Everyone panicked, and people rushed toward the same corridor entrances, while others became trapped trying to navigate unfamiliar hallways deeper inside the castle. The worst part was how confusing the castle became once the lights went out. Filled with smoke and panic, the medieval hallways turned into a maze. Witnesses said people became separated almost immediately. Some guests ran deeper into the castle searching for exits, while others crowded narrow staircases that bottlenecked within seconds. Several doors jammed as the heat spread through the walls and ceilings. Emergency crews arrived within 15 minutes, but firefighters struggled to move through the smoke-filled corridors because parts of the castle lacked modern access routes for rescue equipment. Some survivors trapped upstairs were found only after responders spotted cell phone flashlights through windows. More than 20 others were injured from smoke inhalation, burns, and trampling injuries during the evacuation, and 3 died, including Rana. She was later found unconscious inside a side corridor, only a short distance from one of the emergency exits. The medical examiner confirmed she died from severe smoke inhalation and thermal injuries to her lungs. Karim survived with burns to his arms and a fractured shoulder after collapsing during the evacuation. Firefighters found him near a lower stairwell, repeatedly trying to force his way back inside to find Rana. What investigators uncovered afterward made the tragedy even worse. Parts of the castle's electrical system had reportedly never passed final safety inspection before the wedding, after Karim pushed contractors to finish the restoration months ahead of schedule. Investigators later found ballroom wiring had been routed through hidden medieval wall shafts, where an overheated cable likely ignited dry wooden material behind decorative panels, allowing the fire to spread unnoticed for nearly an hour. After the fire, large sections of the castle were permanently sealed off, and parts of the structure were eventually demolished because engineers considered them too unstable to restore safely. Honestly, the worst part of that story is that a wedding deadline mattered more than the building itself. But the next case proves that same kind of recklessness becomes even deadlier once you move it onto the ocean. It was July 28, 2014, off the coast of a private island resort near Karachi, Pakistan. By late evening, a 220-foot super yacht floated offshore beneath strings of lights while music carried across the Arabian Sea. Guests filled the upper decks under light rain as drone cameras moved overhead, filming the reception from the water. At 39 years old, Faisal Rahman had already become a youngest self-made billionaire after making a fortune through cryptocurrency trading platforms and blockchain investments. His wedding to Amina Sheikh, 35, brought together wealthy guests from London, Dubai, and Doha, many arriving on private jets throughout the weekend. The reception was held on a massive super yacht anchored beside a private island resort near Karachi. By late evening, the upper decks were packed with guests, live music, camera crews, and huge floral displays hanging beneath warm lights stretched across the vessel. Even with the rain drifting across the water, the atmosphere still felt energetic and expensive, if you ask me. It's more like a luxury tech launch party floating in the middle of the ocean. But as the night went on, more people started noticing the yacht moving differently. Several guests later said glasses rattled harder against tables than earlier in the evening. Chandeliers inside the cabin swayed more than expected, and parts of the upper deck felt uneven whenever large groups gathered near the railings. Rain and stronger coastal winds had also started pushing against the vessel, forcing the crew to constantly adjust positioning near the marina. Still, nobody seriously believed the yacht was actually unsafe. During this time, Faisal and Amina moved between guests near the upper observation deck, greeting family and smiling for photographers and drone cameras, completely unaware they were standing right in the middle of a developing stability problem. By 9:40 p.m., hundreds of guests crowded onto one side of the yacht to watch the fireworks. It's one of those moments that probably looked incredible on camera, but in reality, it became a perfect storm. Worsening weather, a top-heavy vessel, stabilizer problems, and too much weight suddenly concentrated along a single side rail. When the yacht suddenly tilted hard sideways, many guests initially thought it was just a rough wave. But the deck didn't level out. It kept leaning. Drinks slid off tables while serving carts rolled into the crowd. One second, guests were watching fireworks, and the next, they're on the floor. Faisal grabbed Amina's arm as people scrambled for railings and furniture, the celebration shifting into panic almost instantly. Things got worse when crew members tried to stabilize the yacht near the marina. Witnesses said the sudden thrust in rough water caused another violent shift across the deck as guests rushed toward the gangway. Amina lost her footing near the edge as people slammed into each other trying to stay upright. Faisal reached for her, but the crowd pulled them apart. Still wearing her heavy wedding gown, Amina fell into the water beside the yacht. Witnesses screamed that someone had gone overboard, but the engines were still active during the maneuver. Investigators believe Amina was pulled beneath the vessel near the propulsion area seconds after falling in. The investigation later found the yacht had been heavily modified for the wedding. The helipad was turned into a marble dance floor, while extra staging and decorations made the vessel unusually top-heavy. One stabilizer system had also reportedly been malfunctioning earlier that night. Rescue boats arrived within 15 minutes, but rough conditions slowed recovery efforts. 14 guests died, including Amina. The medical examiner concluded she died from blunt force, trauma, and drowning after being pulled beneath the yacht. Faisal survived with minor injuries, but reportedly disappeared from public life afterward. For all the security and planning around Faisal's wedding, the whole disaster still came down to bad timing, uneven weight, and one rough wave. And honestly, that same obsession with staying on schedule shows up again in our next story. Except this time, it turns a honeymoon flight into a crash. And before we get into the next story, let me know in the comments which case so far feels the most avoidable to you, because the next wedding somehow gets even worse. It was April 9th, 2018, at a private terminal near Mactan Cebu International Airport in the Philippines. Rain drifted across the runway while ground crews loaded luggage beneath floodlights beside a white Gulfstream jet parked on the tarmac. Inside the cabin, wedding gifts, flower arrangements, and champagne cases still filled the storage compartments. Ryan Mercer was 34 years old and came from a third-generation billionaire family tied to private aviation, finance, and luxury resorts. But from everything people said about him, Ryan wasn't really the type to relax. He planned everything, double-checked everything, and treated work almost like a permanent setting he couldn't turn off. His bride, Leah Gonzalez, 30, also came from a wealthy shipping family in Manila, and people close to them said she was one of the only people who could actually get Ryan to slow down a little. That's why Bora Bora mattered so much to them. It wasn't just their honeymoon trip. It was one of the few vacations Ryan had promised he wouldn't cancel for work. But the wedding itself had already gone off schedule after a thunderstorm interrupted part of the beachfront reception earlier that evening. Speeches ran late, fireworks got delayed, and guests were still leaving the venue nearly 2 hours behind schedule. Most people probably would have just waited until morning at that point. But Ryan didn't. He still wanted the honeymoon flight to leave that night so they could wake up over the Pacific exactly as planned. Several crew members later admitted the pressure to depart became obvious before the plane even started boarding. The Gulf Stream had been sitting on standby most of the day while weather around Cebu slowly got worse. By the time Ryan and Leah arrived at the private terminal shortly before 1 a.m., steady rain was already covering the runway. Ground crews hurried luggage, wedding gifts, camera equipment, and extra cargo onto the aircraft, while pilots recalculated takeoff numbers for the wet conditions. One flight coordinator reportedly suggested waiting until morning for the storm to weaken. And that probably should have been the end of the conversation. But delaying the flight would have disrupted resort transfers, fuel schedules, and arrival permits already arranged for Bora Bora. So the flight continued. At around 1:27 a.m., the jet began accelerating down the runway through heavy rain. Airport cameras later showed the takeoff starting normally before a warning alert suddenly activated inside the cockpit. Investigators later found one of the aircraft's flight control systems detected an abnormal configuration reading during acceleration. The pilots had only seconds to either continue the takeoff or abort before running out of runway. The captain chose to abort, but by then, the jet was already moving too fast on the rain-soaked runway. Witnesses later said sparks appeared beneath the landing gear as the pilot slammed on maximum braking. The aircraft fishtailed slightly before sliding past the runway threshold and breaking through safety barriers towards shallow coastal water beside the airport. And honestly, that's the terrifying part about runway overruns. There's usually no huge explosion at first, just a plane that suddenly refuses to stop moving. The front landing gear collapsed first. The fuselage tore partially open as the aircraft slid into the shoreline, throwing luggage, fuel, and debris into the water, while smoke quickly filled the cabin. Investigators later found the cockpit received a takeoff configuration warning during acceleration, likely connected to flap settings and the aircraft's heavy weight on the rain-soaked runway. The pilots had only seconds to either continue the takeoff or abort before running out of runway. Emergency crews reached the wreckage within minutes, but heavy rain and leaking fuel complicated rescue efforts. Leah was pulled from the cabin alive with fractures and smoke inhalation, while Ryan was found unconscious near the front section after debris collapsed across several seats during the crash. Doctors later confirmed Ryan suffered catastrophic head and chest injuries. He never regained consciousness and died the following evening from severe brain trauma. The final investigation later concluded the crash was caused by a rejected takeoff on a rain-soaked runway while the aircraft was operating near its maximum weight limits. Investigators also found that the delayed departure and pressure to keep the honeymoon schedule played a major role in the decision to attempt takeoff, despite worsening weather conditions. And honestly, this is probably the hardest part of this entire case. Leah and Ryan were only legally married and was already a widow in less than a day. Honestly, Leah becoming a widow less than a day after the wedding is already hard enough to process. While the previous stories were caused by systems failing, this final case is different because the danger was a person. It was October 18, 2014, in Alpine, New Jersey. The Navarro estate was already crowded by late morning. Black SUVs filled the circular driveway, while valet attendants guided arriving guests past white orchid arrangements and stone fountains. Catering crews moved through the hallways carrying silver trays as private security checked invitations near the front gate. Camila Navarro was 32 years old and came from one of the wealthiest real estate families on the East Coast, with luxury properties stretching from Manhattan to Miami. But unlike most of her family, Camila stayed out of the spotlight. Friends described her as quiet, private, and far more comfortable arranging flowers inside her Tribeca studio than attending charity galas with cameras everywhere. While her brothers handled the business empire, Camilla built a private floral design company that mostly worked through wealthy referrals. Privacy mattered to her clients, and honestly, it matched her perfectly. That same atmosphere carried into the wedding. Phones were restricted inside the estate, security controlled the front gates, and staff signed temporary NDAs before entering the property. But there was one problem Camilla couldn't fully keep away from her life. Her former boyfriend, Luis Ortega, 29, had spent months contacting her through fake accounts and showing up near her studio. Friends said Camilla considered filing a restraining order, but worried it would create gossip before the wedding. The estate also had several service roads and side entrances used by vendors throughout the morning. Security focused mostly on the front gate. Earlier that day, one cousin asked whether Luis might show up, but the family chose not to alert staff before the ceremony. Investigators later found Luis had entered through a vendor entrance shortly before 11 a.m. during a busy equipment transfer. Workers assumed he belonged there because he wore a gray tuxedo and carried a leather case. Some staff recognized him from past family events and believed he had been invited. By around 11:20 a.m., Camilla was upstairs in the bridal suite, while photographers took pictures of her dress and veil. Her mother stood near the window, talking quietly with a bridesmaid while another relative arranged jewelry on the vanity table. Hallway cameras later showed Luis walking calmly past a catering cart before entering the suite without knocking. At first, nobody reacted because he looked like another late guest, but the second Camilla saw him, she backed away so fast her hips slammed into the vanity behind her. Witnesses later said Luis placed a leather case onto a chair and opened it. Inside were folded letters and a revolver. The first shot happened before anyone could move. The bullet struck Camilla high in the chest from only a few feet away, throwing her backward into the vanity mirror and shattering glass across her veil and shoulders. Her bouquet scattered across the carpet as people inside the room started screaming. Before she even hit the floor, a second shot struck her lower abdomen. And honestly, this is the part that really gets to me. Everything about that wedding had been carefully controlled. Security, schedules, guest lists, timing. And it still only took seconds for everything to fall apart. The room erupted into panic. Camilla's cousin rushed at Luis and suffered a graze wound to the shoulder, while several relatives wrestled him to the ground. A photographer called 911 around 11:23 a.m. as staff locked nearby hallways. Police arrived within minutes, but Camilla no longer had a stable pulse by the time paramedics reached the suite. The medical examiner confirmed she died from massive internal bleeding caused by 2 close-range gunshot wounds. Investigators said the first bullet damaged her right lung and major blood vessels near the heart. Luis Ortega was arrested at the scene. Prosecutors later said the attack had been planned because he arrived carrying a revolver, written letters, and extra ammunition. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Camilla was buried days later in the same gown meant for the ceremony. Her fiancé had already arrived at the church when police told him the wedding was over.